as you mentioned, gender budgeting, it began as a fiscal innovation, but over the years, what we achieved and what we could not achieve, I think this is the right time to take that, inventory. Because, in the time of pandemic, such an effective public financial management tool like gender budgeting, that space needs to be used beyond the energy infrastructure. Because if you look at the pandemic packages, what is announced was in the energy infrastructure, we ensured gender budgeting, and that was in the gentle neutral ministry like petroleum. We have introduced that fuel, giving fuel to the poor women in the households. That's fine, but in the pandemic packages, nothing beyond that has happened in terms of gender budgeting. So where we can go from here, that is what we need to look into. And as Ashwini pointed out, there is a element in the public policy to use these tools as a tools of social justice. So how can we use gender budgeting as a tool of social justice? That has not yet been, explored to the full potential. For instance, in the Bill of Rights, Justice Verma Committee recommendations in the Bill of Rights, there are a lot of capabilities which were narrated, but those kind of capabilities, in order to make it happen, we need to back it up with budgetary allocations. But those budgetary allocations and the link between that Bill of Rights commitments and the budgetary commitments, that has not happened. But I can understand that Director General was that time Secretary in Social Justice. That's what he mentioned right now. I think in Delhi government there was an attempt to translate the Bill of Rights into budgetary commitments, but that was also not a sustainable process. So this we need to explore further, how we can use it as a medium or a tool of social justice. Second is gender budgeting. It is at the macro level and also at the micro level from ex ante processes. So what is happening right now, we are applying a gender lens to whatever happened, existing budgets and looking into it. So maybe we can start looking into ex ante processes and focus on decentralized levels. And at the local level, if we focus on the gender budgeting initiatives, we will be able to achieve much more than at the macro level. But when I say this, I understand that this process began as a macro exercise because gender is not alone a micro concern. Gender is a macro question. So that time it was a revolutionary thing when we spoke about gender as macro. But that's the way we began. But to tie the both ends, I think we need to strengthen gender budgeting at the local level. I will give you a few examples based on my field level experiences. One is, let us talk about financial inclusion. Only very recently, government started talking about the digital infrastructure and access of women to the financial infrastructure or the financial inclusion. But before that, we thought, whatever happened in terms of reducing the cost of credit, women will be comfortable, and monetary policy and financial policy can do that. But through empirical evidence, we understood that it is not the cost of credit that is matter more for women, it is the access to credit. Because Ashwini mentioned about the self-help group initiatives. A lot of women came out of the house and joined this self-help group initiatives. But in the process, overnight, we were unable to make women micro entrepreneurs. But they came out, that led to social empowerment, but not financial empowerment. And access to banking sector, that was a partial story, because the model was you collect the savings potential of women, collect it in the self-help group, and self-help group open a bank account, and that's the way women can access bank. Otherwise, poor women were perceived as unbankable clients. So maybe this digital revolution or this digital infrastructure and access to the banking sector that has corrected to a certain extent of women being looked upon as unbankable clients. So access is now there, but of course there are many issues. It's not only opening a bank account, whether she's able to do credit related or economic activity related things, or whether her account is zero balance. Those are important questions, but when compared to the earlier peer monitoring model that she has to come up and form a group and she will be doing a peer monitoring model for her activity, and that self-help group will open an account in the bank and deposit those kind of things. That is a peer monitoring model because she doesn't have any collateral asset. The moment you have to open a bank account, you will be asked for collateral. So those things are partially solved the moment we talk about access to credit through this digital infrastructure. Now, savings. Transaction cost is of course reduced the moment you collect everything in the self-help groups. But those savings, whether she is able to mobilize that or translate that into economic activity related instrument, that question is also very crucial, because the way that model function was that whatever the savings self-help group does, what bank will do is they will put equivalent amount into that self-help group and they can go for an economic activity, and if they generate some income they will do some credit rating activity, and then if that self-help group is ready for the next level, then they will do a 1:1 credit infusion. So see, this is such a cumbersome process, and through this women may or may not become micro entrepreneurs. The way they maintain their finance accounts, that itself may not make them eligible to get into the next level of that credit rating when the bankers come and do. So those kind of things doesn't make her an entrepreneur overnight. But what has happened is, as Ashwini rightly pointed out, when women came out, that itself is a big decision. They are coming out from home and they are together. So that social capital and that social networking, and that made social empowerment to them, but not financial empowerment, because we need to work a lot regarding this financial empowerment. Now let's do the same financial inclusion model with men. What has happened to the men-led self-help groups? They have done credit layering, in the sense whatever money bank has given to these boys, they did some kind of credit layering, means they, without any activity, economic activity, this money was given to his friends or relatives or peer groups, and through that they were trying to collect little bit of a high interest rate. It's not exactly a Ponzi game, but that credit layering, they take suppose from 1% interest rate, but they are lending for 2% interest rate, then they can go back and do the repayment very cool. So they were doing this credit layering without creating any business. So these are moments which we always look into trust models, but this may not be a trust based model, because it's a breach of trust that they are not doing anything. But the moment we look into the repayment statistics, they repay. Men repay, women repay. But what is the source of repayment? That is another source of gender tension, because women may be taking money from the bank. She may not be a defaulter. 100% she's paying back, but in between what is happening, who is using that money, who is under pressure to pay that money back, these intra household tensions we are unable to capture. So when public policy support a woman, there are many other nuances which are happening which prevent us to understand what are the channels in which again it is leading to intra household tension, or whether she is getting empowered in the process when a public policy is supporting her. So this is also we need to go for an evaluation, because the main point about gender budgeting is, it is a public policy. When state machinery supports women, they became empowered, they became more safe and secure. So this is an assumption, but there are little bit of story in between here and there, that public policy supporting women doing well, but in between what's happening. This is one example. Second example, let's go to the village of in Orissa, a weaving based village. And that is their strength, that is their inner skill, that they know world class weaving. So when there was when government came up with employer of last resort policy, that is not a gender budgeting policy, it's an employer of last resort. When everything else failed, government guaranteeing jobs to people. But why women were not coming out and accessing that employer of last resort policies? What was that gender budgeting in between this women accessing that employer of last resort? What was happening was that employment of last resort policies were based on women's access to the public works, but women may not be willing to go for taking up the public works or non-farm employment. So their skill or inner strength or their inner talent may be something else. Maybe in that village, weaving may be the thing. So we need to revive that. But when it comes to the employer of last resort, when the menu of the activities was fixed and when it was predominantly public works, those kind of things which women could do, they have talents to do something, world class ability to do weaving, but they were forced to take up something else because we didn't feel what was that missing in this scheme of job guarantee. Because if you ask any heterodox economist, she or he will come up the solution for poverty or solution for a lack of economic development. She or he will just announce we will go for an employer of last resort policy. That's like a silver bullet. But women are not able to come and access it. So what are those complementary fiscal policies absent? We need to check. And I can tell you a parallel example from the what you call as communes, just like our villages. It's communes of Philippines. We went for a field work there in one village named Sosagan. And there, when the counselor was asking the people, it was like a consultative process, what exactly gender budgeting for you, what exactly you want to do when a state machinery is going to support you by giving you money and giving you space to plan your things. So one male, participant, he came up with the idea that we will do gender budgeting in agriculture because I could decipher an issue over there related to gender. So what was it? We revamped irrigation. We will go for more investment in agriculture. And what is a gender budgeting? Because in Philippines, you can understand from the data, you have seen that many women from the villages go to urban centers and also to abroad as nannies to take care of others' children. So that is creating that absence of mother in own home is creating a lot of social, economic issues. And how to prevent women leaving that village. What could be that gender budgeting? So they revamp irrigation, they strengthen the investment in the agriculture sector so that more employment could be generated for women over there. And they try to prevent women moving from the villages, their own homes, to urban, because this care providers home, that also it's coming up as another important study, because women as care providers, that is of course an opportunity, but the care provider's home, what's happening to that when she moved out of her home as a care provider? So how can we prevent that and put her back to her own roots and let her work? So this is also gender budgeting. So Atmanirbhar Bharat, we understand that it has got bad connotation and good connotation. But what is this Atmanirbhar policies in the context of gender budgeting? What we can think. One is this example I mentioned about weaving. What she can do, we need to revive that instead of, what she can't do. So maybe these kind of examples may be good examples, but I'm not talking about any protectionism or anything. But these are some good examples which we can highlight. Another example is a doctor was a counselor of another commune, and she wants to reduce maternal mortality rate in her village to zero. What could be the gender budgeting which is required to reduce the maternal mortality rate to zero in that commune? So then, it was understood that it is not a technological revolution that is required to make that maternal mortality zero, because we know that British journal article of 3 delay model. One is women has to perceive that she's feeling ill and she needs to communicate it to her close male relative. That is delay number 1. And there is usually it takes long time, because interpreting her own problems, that's a huge concern. We talk about satellite medicine and all, but women do not know to interpret her disease or her illness. She can't. So that is delay number 1. Second is, when she communicate, what is the time taken for that male or relative or her close female relative to take her to the hospital? Then physical infrastructure, social infrastructure, all this comes over there. Then the third is whether the facility she's getting in that place, whether doctors are available, whether sisters are available. So this is a 3 delay model. So gender budgeting can help in these 3 levels, may not be in the first level that she communicate, but gender budgeting, how it can help means if we can strengthen the agency in her by making her participate in the government related programs. She come out of the home, when that agency in her is strengthened through her participating in some other activities, that's the only thing in which she can be empowered and she can go for a communication about her own problems. So that is one thing. So there are different ways in which, so usually people ask, what is gender in infrastructure? This is gender in infrastructure, because if her infrastructure is good, she will not die. Her process of getting to the hospital may be faster. So infrastructure cannot be treated as gender neutral. So this is another example. But I would also like to highlight the Nobel laureate Duflo and Chattopadhyay has conducted an experiment in India, but that is not gender budgeting, because to immunization, to increase the immunization rate, the experiment done by Duflo is, in her controlled experiment, in some camps she provided lentils, in some camps not providing lentils, but women responded to the camps where lentils were provided. But is that lentil provisioning is gender budgeting? Because it can just be a short-term policy. You cannot incentivize a woman by giving dal and ask her to come her children to get her children immunized. So that is why randomized control experiments, the way they perceive the development issues of our country, that was flawed. It is not only a methodological flaw, but how they perceive the experiments also flawed. And of course, when you control, in terms of nutrition of the children, how you control, you will not provide eggs or you will not provide milk to the children if you want to study that. How do you control? So these are ethical or unethical. So these are issues related to the randomized control experiments, and whether it is child budgeting or gender budgeting, what are the policy inferences you get from those experiments? That's why, that immunization issue. But one experiment I enjoyed, of Duflo is feminization of governance, whether that lead to, increase in what you call accepting the gender related investment in your budgetary decisions. And in that experiment, I think she got it affirmative that more women at the local level, when they are at the decision making levels, that could improve the public expenditure decisions favoring women. That experiment was okay. And Ashwini also highlighted that critical mass, the importance of that. We need diversity in when we talk about governance process and feminization of governance. That gender budgeting is also a governance question. It is also about implementation. It's not only about what we decide in terms of financial inputs. So these were the quick micro level experiments I thought that I will share. Now, coming back to the macro level, the macro constraints affect gender budgeting. In the sense, now we have an accommodative fiscal space. Like we think that deficit is good. But otherwise, we have a fiscal rule. We have to keep deficit to 3% of GDP. And that fiscal consolidation, if we are proceeding through expenditure compression, when there is revenue uncertainty, when revenues are not buoyant, we are compelled to go for expenditure compression. So, what will be the decision there? We will compress the expenditure which are primarily human development in nature, related in nature. So, that will affect gender budgeting. So, the overall macroeconomic framework also affects gender budgeting. But now we have an accommodative fiscal space. So, now this is a time in which we can reprioritize, and we need to identify gender budgeting as a public financial management long-term policy tool, because economic stimulus packages are short run and we have to go for the normalization procedure today or tomorrow, and by 2025 we have to go back to that 3% of GDP or something. Deficit needs to be controlled. But this accommodative fiscal policy stance, this time we may be able to prioritize gender budgeting as a powerful public financial management long-term tool to go for transparency and accountability. And when I talk about transparency, it is not only the announcements, because we have a lot of announcements in terms of the pandemic packages, but we have to wait and see in the February budget we get the actuals of this pandemic packages we have announced. If there is a huge gap between the promises and the actually realized, then the story is partial. And that budget credibility is equally important in the time of pandemic, that effectiveness. Ruchita, I will stop here and take questions. Yeah, over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor Chakraborty. It was a very expansive presentation.